it's really quite nice to be watching from a distance and seeing what's happening at the 2022 games, to be able to choose various different sports to watch, whereas when you're kind of very much in it, you're immersed in your environment. So mine are 4 years ago, and hopefully that will kind of contrast quite nicely with some of the stuff that Pete was talking about there. So just very briefly to introduce myself, I've got a sport and exercise science background. I'm a performance analyst, worked predominantly in football before moving into the English Institute of Sport, and specifically England Netball. I'm going to talk a little bit about that change and that move, and kind of from your point of view. Pete mentioned it a little bit there. I predominantly do these conferences to other analysts. That's the nature of the conferences we tend to go to, and same for nutrition, same for medical. It's great to be able to talk to coaches to kind of get a little bit of a different insight. And I think when we do the little breakout and do the questions, hopefully that will be the conversations, because I'm not used to talking to coaches. So for a little bit of context, for those of you that have potentially not netball au fait, why exactly has Adam asked me to come and talk today? So we'll just play this very brief little clip.
I'm sure all of England are on their feet at this very moment. Someone's striking out a big time on the clock. Gee, this is where the tactics come in, don't they? 30 seconds. They can lock it. It is then their set pass. That's it. Score. Extraordinary scenes here. England, the first.
Okay. I think I could just about do that commentary off by heart, the amount of times I've seen that clip, and the feeling. I'm still sort of a little bit goosebumps watching it now, and that's 4 years ago, and you know, fingers crossed in 2 or 3 days' time we get to see those scenes again. To try and kind of discuss the culmination of a 4-year cycle to a single moment, and we're literally talking about a single second. It happened last night in the basketball, the last second to score that basket or miss, and the impact that then has as a knock-on. And I think to kind of really sort of emphasise that point, I think I'll go back and say, well, how did I get to this point here and that basket going in? So I started working in football, and I knew that I always wanted to work in academia. That was a plan of mine. It was what I wanted to do, and I got some great advice, sadly not from Jerry and Ree, that one, but actually from Ryan Gary, who is head coach of the men's England under 18s at the moment, and was talking about, he's very much from a coach background, but if you are wanting these different experiences, if you're potentially wanting to work in a different environment, in a different field, for me it was academia, you need that variety of experiences, and that doesn't matter whether you're an analyst or a coach or whatever. And so those that have worked in football, or those that know a little bit about football, it's very easy to get stuck, it's very easy to kind of stay in that environment. So I took quite a bold step and decided to step away from football and got a job working in the English Institute of Sport for England Netball. And for me, very big decision, very difficult decision, but one that has opened up all sorts of different opportunities. Now, the first thing, talking about coaches, talking to a group of coaches, the first thing the head coach of England Netball did with me was send me off to the Under-21s World Cup. New to the sport, new to the environment, different culture, different ethos, different everything that I'd known about sport. And so she said, go away with Under-21s for a few months. And being in camps, we went over to Gaborone in Botswana for the Under-21s World Cup. What a fantastic decision from that coach to allow one of your support staff to slowly develop in a new sport, in a new environment. And the culture, as with any sport, the culture in netball is obviously vital. And that was a really great decision, and I'm really thankful to the coach for giving me the opportunity to learn in a slightly less pressured, slightly less intense environment, albeit a Youth World Cup. But that was a really great decision. When that Youth World Cup was over, the brilliant thing about Commonwealth sport, and again, there are people in the room who know lots about Commonwealth sport, the nature of it is you get to travel, because netball specifically, if you want to compete at the top level, you're going to Australia, you're going to New Zealand, you're going to South Africa, you're going to Jamaica, because that's where that level of competition is. And by going on those camps, the endless flights, the hotels, which absolutely sounds great on paper but are a bit of a pain, you learn so much. You learn so much more about the athletes than I ever did working in football. You get to know them at a different level. The other staff that you're working with, you know in such greater detail and greater depth and with better relationships than turning up to the training ground in a football club and then going home. So through these camps, we grew, we developed, we progressed until it was time for the Commonwealth Games. Now again, talking to a group of coaches, the next fantastic decision that our head coach made was, we went to Australia incredibly early. So again, Pete Thane was over in Australia with basketball. They flew out however many weeks before. Was it even weeks?
We went straight into that immersion camp 10 days before the comp started.
So 10 days before basketball came out, because our senior athletes, and these 5 athletes are the core of the team, they were based out in Australia. They play their netball out in the Super League in Australia. So we flew out 7 weeks before the Commonwealth Games final.
Funding.
Sorry?
Funding.
But yeah, yeah, easy to do that. What a fantastic decision, because it allowed us, rather than those athletes coming to the UK, acclimatising, people have a great slide there about jet lag and all those things, we were out there with them. Now, a lot happened in that time, not all of it positive. There was all sorts of different things that went wrong. We had some real contractual difficulties where we actually ended up playing some warm-up games against some of our girls because we played against some of the Super League teams out in Australia. There was a little bit around because they were our rivals, very messy. We were out in the base camp over there where initially we didn't have an accommodation to stay in. We weren't supposed to be there as early as we were there, and there was all sorts of problems. A great example is talk about coming out of football and into a new world. The netball dresses arrived, and anybody that knows anything about netball, if the netball dresses aren't right, there's hell on. And the netball dresses weren't right. So myself and Paul Dring, team manager, are driving around Sydney trying to find a seamstress to fix these netball dresses because it's just the worst thing in the world that can happen. That's the reality of being in that competition. It was an intense 5-6 week period prior to those games where all sorts of various things happened. But I think it all kind of added to the mix and culminated into the athletes' village, into the competition, and of course, ultimately we were successful. I'm less interested in talking about that week or 10 days per se. I think it's, we can maybe have that conversation if there's some specific questions about it. I'm more interested in what happened afterwards, because we weren't supposed to win. We were miles away from it. We'd never been in a final before. In fact, nobody other than Australia or New Zealand had ever been in a final before. We weren't supposed to be there. We were there to make up the numbers, and suddenly we won a gold medal. And now what? And that, for me, talking to a group of coaches, is something I'm really interested in. What happens next? So this was our support team that was out there, and I'll come back to this slide a bit. Quite a large team out in the village. I'll circle back to why that slide's up there for now. But we
This is about to be a moment. Get your cameras out. Press the record button.
So we win our gold medal. I absolutely love this clip because you can see the people's face, the shaking of the heads. Nobody could believe that we achieved even a medal full stop, let alone getting in there and winning a gold medal. Okay? So what happens next? And nobody knows. And our team manager again, Paul Dring, is running around answering his phone at all hours. There's a time difference out in Australia, which is a nightmare. And what do you do? And we were able to experience some brilliant things. So we went on to ITV News, and some of our girls did a really great job of talking through their experiences. The reason I want to show that clip particularly is because those 2 athletes there were 2 of our bench players. They didn't play very many minutes of the Commonwealth Games because, if you think back to the slide where I put our senior athletes on, they all went back to Australia, or rather they stayed in Australia. The Com Games finished, we're on the Gold Coast, they stayed in Australia to finish their season. Suddenly we're flying back to the UK, fielding all of these press things, so the girls were on one show, which is lovely and fantastic. Again, the 2 athletes that you can see here are not, Rachel Dunn in the middle didn't even go to the games because our athletes are still playing netball back at their clubs. We were so underprepared for this success. And then the culmination of, I suppose, all of these exciting things were
The 2018 Team of the Year is
the Sports Personality of the Year.
England Netball Team.
Managed to get the girls from Australia back over to the UK for this, and it was just the most magical kind of finale to what had been an astonishing 4 years. And so you have this success, and again, I'm really interested when we do the breakout to talk to you as coaches as to, well, what's the legacy of that? What happens? And we are now 4 years later at the next Commonwealth Games here in Birmingham, and fingers crossed our netball girls so far are 4 from 4, which is brilliant. But this was the team that went out in 2018. Our physio left, our head coach left. I'm now standing here as a BCU member of staff. The assistant coach left, the PD left, the special technical coach, assistant coach left, our S&C coach left, our performance lifestyle left. There are 3 members of staff, 2 of which are remote EIS members of staff. So realistically, there's 1 left from a 4-year cycle. A really successful 4 years where we won a gold medal, and this is the legacy of that. Why? I certainly don't know the answer to that. Is it normal? Again, I don't know the answer to that. But to see such a turnover in staff from one games to another, from one cycle to another, for me, feels and continues to feel, and that's why I'm kind of interested to talk to you guys about it, whether that's what we expect and whether that's normal and why that might be. From an entirely personal point of view, to achieve something that we weren't expecting to achieve, we had a World Cup the following year, a home World Cup, the huge attraction, a huge tide, a huge pull of a home World Cup, and yet I left almost immediately after that photograph was taken, and I'm now standing here in BCU kit. Why is that? Why did that happen? And from a coach's point of view, as a support member of staff, what are your opinions on that? And I'm really interested to kind of have that when we have a chat. Done.
Awesome.
Thank you very much.